You're not crazy. That sativa you bought from the dispensary last week that was supposed to give you energy and focus, the one that knocked you out on the couch instead, yeah, there's a reason for that, and it's going to piss you off. The legal cannabis industry has basically turned energizing weed into an endangered species, and they're doing it on purpose. Not because energizing strains are impossible to grow, not because customers don't want them, but because growing real sativas cuts into profit margins. That's it. That's the whole story. But here's the good news. After diving deep into this problem, talking to actual legacy growers who know their shit, and connecting with thousands of frustrated cannabis consumers who thought they were losing their minds, I figured out exactly what's happening and, more importantly, what you can do about it. If you've been chasing that clear-headed, motivating high and keep ending up disappointed, this is everything you need to know. Let's start with the lie you've been sold: the sativa, indica labels at your dispensary. You know, that whole system where sativas are supposed to be energizing and indicas are supposed to be relaxing, that entire framework is basically useless now. And here's why. Originally, when cannabis grew wild and free across the planet, sativa strains developed in warmer climates, places like Thailand, South Africa, Mexico, and Colombia. These equatorial regions produce tall, lanky plants that stretch toward the sun. They took their sweet time flowering, sometimes 3 to 4 months, but the wait was worth it. These plants naturally produce specific terpene profiles that created energizing, cerebral, clear-headed effects. Meanwhile, indica strains evolved in colder mountain regions like Afghanistan, Pakistan, and northern India. These plants grew short and bushy to survive harsh conditions, flowered much faster, sometimes in just 8 weeks, and produced terpenes that created more sedating, body-focused effects. So far, so good, right? The problem is that cannabis has been crossbred into oblivion. We're not dealing with pure genetics anymore. Almost everything on dispensary shelves today is a hybrid of a hybrid of a hybrid, mixed and matched so many times that the original genetic signatures are barely detectable. The idea that you can walk into a dispensary, grab something labeled sativa, and expect it to behave like a landrace Thai or Colombian strain from the 1970s is fantasy. Now, I'm not saying pure sativas don't exist anywhere. There are dedicated legacy growers and seed preservationists out there hunting down original genetics, maintaining heirloom clones, and growing authentic landrace strains. These people exist, and they're doing incredible work, but they're not the ones supplying your local dispensary chain. What you're getting at most commercial operations is genetically ambiguous weed with a marketing label slapped on it. And here's where it gets even more frustrating. The labels are basically meaningless because there's no enforcement. Big cannabis companies can call their products whatever the hell they want. There's no genetic testing requirement to verify lineage. No accountability. No standards. They could literally take the same plant, put it in 2 different packages, call one energizing sativa and the other relaxing indica, and nobody would stop them. But the genetic confusion is only part of the problem. The bigger issue is that big cannabis doesn't want to grow real sativas even when they have access to the genetics. Why? Because authentic sativa plants need more time to flower. Think about it from a business perspective. If you're running a large-scale commercial grow operation focused on maximizing profit, every extra week your plants spend in the flowering room is money bleeding out. That's more electricity for lights, more water, more labor, more HVAC costs, more time before you can flip that inventory and get paid. Real sativa strains that need 12 to 16 weeks to properly mature? Forget it. That's a financial nightmare for operations obsessed with turnover. So what does big cannabis do instead? They grow fast-flowering hybrids that finish in 8 to 9 weeks, slap a sativa label on the ones with pointier leaves or lighter green color, and call it a day. The plants might have some distant sativa genetics buried somewhere in their family tree, but the actual chemical profile, the thing that determines effects, is often nothing like what you're expecting. This is why you keep buying sativas that make you sleepy. It's not the strain name that matters, it's the chemical composition of that specific plant, and that gets determined by way more factors than just genetics. Here's where things get really interesting. Even if you somehow found a dispensary growing genetically pure sativa plants, the effects could still end up sedating based on when they harvest. Let me explain. Cannabis produces its active compounds in tiny mushroom-shaped glands called trichomes. These trichomes go through a maturation process that you can actually see if you look at the buds under magnification. They start out clear, then turn cloudy or milky white, and eventually some of them turn amber. The stage at which growers harvest determines the chemical profile. When trichomes are mostly clear to cloudy, you get higher levels of THC in its more stimulating form. But as trichomes turn amber, THC begins degrading into CBN, cannabinol. You've probably seen CBN in sleep products because it's sedative as hell. If a grower lets their plants go too long before harvest, even a genetically sativa plant will have elevated CBN levels that create couch lock effects. This is one of those variables that big commercial operations struggle with. They're harvesting on schedules determined by business needs rather than plant readiness. They might have 10,000 plants that need to come down this week to keep the production line moving, regardless of whether those specific plants have hit their optimal trichome maturity. The result? Inconsistent effects even within the same strain from the same grower. Remember in the last discussion how we talked about terpenes being crucial for effects? How if you see myrcene or linalool as the dominant terpenes, you're probably looking at something sedating? And how pinene, limonene, or terpinolene tend to correlate with more energizing effects. That's all still true and important. But here's the thing. Terpenes only tell part of the story. They're like reading the first chapter of a book and thinking you understand the whole plot. The terpene profile matters enormously, but it exists alongside cannabinoid ratios, harvest timing, curing methods, and even how you consume the product. This is why you can find two different batches of Jack Herer, supposedly the same strain, and have completely different experiences. One might be energizing and focused, exactly what you wanted. The other might be heavy and sedating. Same name, wildly different chemical composition based on growing conditions, harvest timing, and post-harvest handling. The complexity is both beautiful and infuriating. Beautiful because this plant is incredibly sophisticated with hundreds of active compounds working together. Infuriating because it means you can't rely on strain names or simple labels to predict effects. So what the hell are you supposed to do if you want energizing cannabis but keep getting disappointed by dispensary products? You've got a few options, and none of them are as simple as we'd like. Growing your own is option one, and honestly, it's not as hard as you might think. I've grown from both autoflower seeds and clones multiple times, and the learning curve is real but manageable. There's something genuinely magical about watching these plants develop, seeing the colors change, observing the trichomes forming. It's part science project, part meditation, entirely satisfying. Will your first harvest be the best weed on the planet? Probably not. Mine wasn't. But it'll be yours. You'll know exactly what went into it. You can control the genetics and harvest timing, and honestly, the whole process is just fun. If you have the space, the time, and the legal permission to grow, this solves a lot of problems. The challenge is finding quality genetics, specifically those older landrace or landrace adjacent sativa genetics that create the energizing effects we're chasing. You need to find reputable legacy seed banks, not just whatever pops up first on Google. We're talking about companies that have preserved heirloom genetics, that work with seed collectors and preservation projects, that actually give a shit about maintaining the diversity and quality of cannabis genetics. If anyone reading this knows solid, reputable seed banks specializing in authentic sativa genetics, places where people can legally purchase seeds with those older landrace characteristics, please speak up. That information is gold for people trying to take this into their own hands. But let's be real, not everyone can grow their own cannabis. You might live in an apartment with no outdoor space. You might be in a state where home cultivation isn't legal. You might not have the time, interest, or physical ability to manage plants. Growing isn't accessible to everyone, and that's okay. So if the dispensary is your only option, you need to become a smarter shopper. This means doing homework that shouldn't be necessary, but absolutely is in the current market. First, look for craft cannabis, small farms, and family operations rather than big corporate brands. These smaller producers are more likely to care about the actual quality and effects of their product rather than just maximizing yield and turnover. They often hand trim their flowers, take more time in curing, and actually pay attention to terpene preservation. Companies like Autumn Brands here in California have built their reputation on quality over quantity. They grow outdoor in living soil, use ladybugs instead of pesticides, because pesticides are neurotoxins and that's bad news for everyone, and actually give a shit about producing cannabis that delivers specific effects. That's the kind of brand you want to support with your dollars. Second, learn to read beyond the strain name and actually analyze the lab results. Every legal cannabis product should have testing data available, either printed on the package or accessible through a QR code or batch number. Look at that data. Specifically, look at the terpene profile. If myrcene is the #1 terpene, that product is probably going to be sedating, regardless of whether it's labeled sativa, indica, or hybrid. Myrcene is that mango-scented terpene that enhances THC's ability to cross the blood-brain barrier and creates heavy, couch lock effects. I've seen products labeled as Durban Poison and Jack Herer, strains with reputations as energizing sativas, that had myrcene as the dominant terpene. That's not going to give you the effects you're looking for. Instead, prioritize products where pinene, limonene, or terpinolene are the dominant terpenes. Pinene, that sharp pine-like aroma, is associated with alertness and memory retention. Limonene, citrusy and bright, tends to be mood-elevating and energizing. Terpinolene, floral and herbal, often creates uplifting, creative effects. These terpene profiles are much more likely to deliver the energizing experience you're chasing. Third, and this was eye-opening for me, think about your consumption method. If you're smoking joints or blunts, which I've been doing for years, you might be sabotaging yourself. The temperature of combustion when you light plant material on fire is incredibly high, often over 800 degrees. At those temperatures, you're literally burning off many of the terpenes before your body can absorb them. Terpenes are volatile compounds. They vaporize at much lower temperatures than what combustion produces. When you smoke, you get some of the cannabinoids, but lose a significant portion of the terpene profile that shapes effects. This might explain why that dispensary sativa with a decent terpene profile on paper still didn't deliver the experience you expected. This is the case for vaporizers. Quality vaporizers heat cannabis to the point where cannabinoids and terpenes vaporize, usually between 350 to 400 degrees Celsius, but without actual combustion. This preserves more of the complete chemical profile and lets you experience the full entourage effect. The difference can be dramatic. Now, I'm not talking about cheap pens or disposable cartridges filled with who knows what. I'm talking about quality dry herb vaporizers designed for flower consumption. These come in all sizes, from desktop units to small handheld devices. If anyone has recommendations for reliable, portable dry herb vaporizers, that's information worth sharing. Fourth, build a personal database of what works for you. This takes effort, but it pays off enormously over time. Every time you try a new product, document it. Write down the strain name, the brand, the dominant terpenes, the THC and CBD percentages, the harvest date if available, how you consumed it, and most importantly, how it made you feel. Over time, patterns emerge. You'll start noticing that certain terpene combinations always work well for you. You'll identify specific growers whose products consistently deliver. You'll figure out which consumption methods preserve the effects you're looking for. This personal data becomes your roadmap through the confusing dispensary landscape. Here's the brutal reality we need to acknowledge. Legal cannabis has become the McDonald's of weed. It's standardized, it's mass-produced, it's optimized for profit rather than quality, and there's minimal accountability for whether it actually delivers what it promises. Can two things be true at once? Absolutely. We can be grateful that legal cannabis markets exist, that people in many places now have safe access without legal risk, that medical patients can obtain their medicine without dealing with black market uncertainty. That's all real progress worth celebrating. And we can simultaneously demand better. We can insist on quality, transparency, and products that actually work as advertised. We can vote with our wallets by supporting craft producers over corporate operations. We can share information about which brands deliver and which ones disappoint. We can refuse to accept that good enough is the best we deserve. The energizing sativas we're chasing haven't disappeared from the planet. They exist. Legacy growers are cultivating them. Seed preservationists are protecting the genetics. Small craft operations are producing them in limited quantities. The challenge is connecting consumers who want these products with growers who produce them. This is where community becomes crucial. We need to share information about which brands in which states are doing it right. If you're in Colorado and you found a craft grower producing legitimate energizing sativas, tell people. If you're in Michigan and discovered a small family farm with incredible terpene profiles, spread the word. If you're in California and know which brands to avoid because their sativa labels are meaningless, warn others. This information sharing is how we route around the broken system. The big corporate dispensaries with their misleading labels and profit-optimized products, they'll keep doing what they're doing as long as customers keep buying. But when informed consumers start seeking out quality producers and avoiding the corporate garbage, market dynamics shift. Money talks. And when customers start demanding real quality, some producers will step up to provide it. For those of us who use cannabis to become the best version of ourselves, whether that means managing pain, enhancing focus and creativity, finding motivation for difficult tasks, or simply feeling more present and engaged with life, the current dispensary landscape is deeply frustrating. When you know that the expensive, heavily taxed product you just bought doesn't serve your needs, something has to change. That change starts with education. Understanding why dispensary sativas often disappoint, the genetic confusion, the profit-driven cultivation practices, the harvest timing issues, the meaningless labels, arms you with knowledge to make better choices. You stop trusting marketing and start trusting chemistry. You stop assuming strain names mean anything and start reading lab results. You stop accepting whatever the bud tender recommends and start asking informed questions. It also means recognizing that you're not alone in this frustration. There are thousands of us, maybe more, who prefer energizing cannabis, but keep running into the same disappointing products. We're not the mainstream market. We're not the majority that wants maximum THC percentage in fast-flowering couch-lock hybrids. But we exist. We're valid, and our preferences matter. The solution might involve some combination of growing our own when possible, connecting with legacy growers and craft producers who prioritize quality, learning to read and interpret lab results, adjusting our consumption methods to preserve terpenes, and building communities where we share information about what actually works. It's more work than it should be. In an ideal world, you'd walk into a dispensary, ask for energizing sativa, and receive exactly that. But we don't live in that world yet. We live in a world where profit margins often matter more than product quality, where labels are suggestions rather than guarantees, and where consumers need to become their own advocates and researchers. The good news? Once you develop these skills, you're never going back to blind purchasing. Once you understand the chemistry behind effects, you can't unsee it. Once you've experienced truly energizing cannabis, the kind that makes you want to create, move, engage, and live fully, you won't settle for sedating garbage labeled as sativa. This is just the beginning of a larger conversation about quality, transparency, and accountability in the legal cannabis industry. The more people who wake up to these issues and start demanding better, the more pressure builds on producers to actually deliver quality products that match their marketing claims. So here's what I'm asking. Share your experiences. If you found energizing sativas that actually work, tell people where and what. If you've identified brands that consistently disappoint, warn others. If you've discovered consumption methods that preserve effects better, spread that knowledge. If you're growing your own and found great genetic sources, point people in that direction. We're building a community of people who refuse to accept mediocre cannabis just because it's legal and convenient. A community that values transparency, quality, and honest effects over corporate marketing and misleading labels. A community that remembers or has heard stories about what cannabis used to be and refuses to accept that those days are gone forever. The energizing, clear-headed, motivating cannabis we're looking for still exists. Finding it just requires more knowledge, more effort, and more community support than it should. But that's where we are, and that's the challenge we're taking on together. Your experience matters, your preferences are valid, and the cannabis industry needs to hear from people like us that good enough isn't good enough anymore. We deserve better, and we're not going to stop demanding it until things change.